The storm had been raging for 3 days straight on Kepler 442b, turning the crimson soil into rivers of mud that snaked between the crystalline rock formations. Marcus Chen pressed his face against the reinforced polymer window of his repair shop, watching purple lightning split the amber sky. The electromagnetic interference made his tools spark and die, leaving him with nothing but candles and the rhythmic patter of alien rain on his roof. He'd built this place himself, a modest structure of salvaged ship hull and local stone, tucked between two towering spires of natural crystal that the Velter called singing stones. When the wind was right, they hummed a haunting melody that reminded him why he'd stayed on this world for 7 years instead of catching the next transport back to Earth. The knock came so softly he almost missed it. Marcus froze, teacup halfway to his lips. No one traveled during the storm season. The Velter sealed themselves in their hive cities until the weather passed, and the human settlement was 40 kilometers away across treacherous terrain. Another knock, more urgent this time. He set down his cup and moved to the door, hand instinctively reaching for the plasma cutter on his tool belt. 7 years of frontier life had taught him caution, but when he cracked open the door, the weapon dropped from his fingers. A child stood on his doorstep. Not human, Velter, but young, maybe 8 or 9 in human years, though alien aging was hard to judge. The child's carapace was still soft and pale, not yet hardened into the deep blue-black of adulthood. 4 arms hugged a tattered piece of fabric against a thin torso, and large, compound eyes, each the size of Marcus's palm, stared up at him with unmistakable terror. "Please," the child whispered in heavily accented standard. The voice was high and musical, like wind through the singing stones. "I lost my mother today. Please, I'm scared. Let me stay one night." Marcus's throat went dry. He'd never heard a Velter child speak standard. Hell, he'd barely seen Velter children at all. They were kept hidden in the deep chambers of their cities, protected and cherished above all else. The child swayed on stick-thin legs, soaked to the bone. Purple blood, Velter blood, mixed with rainwater and dripped from small cuts on the delicate carapace. "Kid," Marcus began, then stopped. What was he supposed to say? How had this child even found his shop? The nearest Velter settlement was 50 kilometers through hostile terrain. Thunder crashed overhead, so loud it rattled the walls. The child flinched and stumbled forward, nearly collapsing at Marcus's feet. "Stay forever," he whispered without thinking, scooping the child up in his arms. The words just came out, an old human saying his grandmother used to tell him when he was scared. "Mi casa es tu casa, my home is your home." The child went limp with relief, and Marcus felt the rapid flutter of 2 hearts against his chest. He carried the young Velter inside, mind racing. This was impossible. Velter didn't lose their children. Their society was built around protecting the next generation. Every adult would die before letting harm come to a youngling. Unless something had gone very, very wrong. Marcus laid the child on his couch, a hand-built thing of local wood and earth-imported cushions. Up close, he could see the extent of the injuries. The cuts were precise, surgical, not accidental. "What's your name?" he asked gently, kneeling beside the couch. The child's compound eyes fixed on him with surprising focus. "Kethera, but Mama called me Key." "Key," Marcus repeated. The name felt strange on his tongue. "I'm Marcus, you're safe now." But even as he said it, Marcus knew it might not be true. Nothing about this situation made sense. Velter children didn't wander alone in storms. They didn't speak standard, and they certainly didn't show up bleeding at the door of a human repair shop. He moved to his communication array, hoping the storm had died down enough to send a message to the human settlement. The council needed to know about this, but when he flipped the switch, nothing happened. The storm was still too strong. "Marcus," Key's voice was barely a whisper. "They're coming." Ice shot through Marcus's veins. "Who's coming?" But Key had already passed out, tiny body finally succumbing to exhaustion and blood loss. Outside, the storm raged on, but through the howling wind and pounding rain, Marcus heard something else. The deep, rhythmic thrumming of Velter transport pods cutting through the weather. They were coming fast, and they were coming for the child. Marcus looked at Key's unconscious form, then at his modest collection of tools and weapons. Whatever was happening, whatever had driven this child into the storm, it was about to arrive at his doorstep. He'd been a combat engineer in the Colonial Marines for 12 years before coming to Kepler 442b. He'd seen wars between species, watched civilizations tear themselves apart. But he'd never had an alien child look up at him with pure terror and beg for sanctuary. The thrumming grew louder. Through his window, Marcus could see lights cutting through the storm, military-grade illumination arrays that could pierce even this weather. He had maybe 5 minutes before they arrived. Marcus Chen had made his choice the moment he'd whispered, "Stay forever," to a scared child in the rain. Now he had to live with the consequences. The lights were getting closer. The Velter transport touched down in Marcus's yard with a sound like breaking glass. The craft was sleek and predatory, its bioluminescent hull pulsing with angry red patterns that Marcus had learned meant aggression during his years among their kind. He stood in his doorway, plasma cutter in one hand, emergency beacon in the other. Behind him, Key remained unconscious on the couch, wrapped in one of Marcus's old military blankets. The transport's boarding ramp lowered with a pneumatic hiss, and 3 figures emerged into the storm. Adult Velter, their carapaces dark blue-black with age and authority. They moved with the fluid precision of trained soldiers, compound eyes scanning the area with mechanical efficiency. The one in the center stepped forward, and Marcus felt his blood chill. This wasn't just any Velter. The intricate scarification along the creature's arms marked him as enforcement caste, the closest thing their species had to police. But the patterns were wrong somehow, too angular, too aggressive for normal law enforcement. "Human Marcus Chen," the Velter spoke, his translator device rendering the words in perfect standard. "You harbor stolen property of the Velter communion. Surrender the youngling and no harm will come to you." "Stolen property?" Marcus kept his voice level, years of military training kicking in. "That's a child, not property." The Velter's mandibles clicked, a sound Marcus recognized as either amusement or irritation. "Your human concepts do not apply here. The youngling belongs to the state. It has been selected for special purpose." Through his open door, Marcus could hear Key stirring. The child was waking up, and the fear in that small voice when she'd begged for sanctuary told him everything he needed to know about this special purpose. "Selected for what?" Marcus asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. "That is not your concern, human." The Velter's eyes flicked to the plasma cutter in Marcus's hand. "You are outnumbered and outgunned. Be reasonable." Marcus glanced at the other 2 enforcement caste members. They carried weapons he didn't recognize, organic-looking things that pulsed with the same bioluminescence as their ship. Energy weapons, probably, and they were right about being outnumbered. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed he was alone. "Marcus," Key's voice came from behind him, small and frightened. The child had woken up and was peering around the door frame with those enormous compound eyes. The lead Velter's posture changed instantly, becoming more aggressive. "Youngling Cathara, you will come with us now. Your testing phase is not complete." "No," Key pressed closer to Marcus's legs, and he could feel the child trembling. "They hurt Mama, they killed Mama." The world seemed to stop. Marcus felt something cold and furious unfold in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced since the war. "You killed her mother." "The breeding stock served its purpose," the Velter said with casual indifference. "The youngling is ready for the next phase of development. Human sentiment is irrelevant." Breeding stock, development. The clinical language made Marcus sick, but it also told him everything he needed to know about what kind of Velter he was dealing with. These weren't normal enforcement caste. These were purists, a radical faction within Velter society that viewed other species as either resources or threats. "Here's the thing," Marcus said, raising the plasma cutter. "I don't give a damn about your testing phases or your development programs. That child asked me for sanctuary, and I'm going to give it to her." The Velter leader's mandibles clicked rapidly now, definitely irritation. "You would risk your life for an alien spawn." "Wouldn't be the first time." What happened next took less than 3 seconds. The Velter on the left raised his weapon, bioluminescent patterns flaring along its barrel. Marcus dove sideways, pulling Key with him as a bolt of superheated plasma scorched the air where they'd been standing. His front door exploded into splinters. Marcus hit the ground rolling, came up behind his workbench, and triggered the emergency beacon. The device would punch through the storm interference and alert the human settlement, but it would take time for help to arrive. Time he might not have. "Stay down," he whispered to Key, then popped up long enough to return fire with his plasma cutter. The tool wasn't designed as a weapon, but at close range it could cut through most materials, including Velter carapace. The bolt caught the leftmost attacker center mass, and the alien went down screaming. Purple blood hissed where it hit the floor. "Foolish human," the leader snarled, advancing into the shop. "You have only delayed the inevitable." But Marcus was already moving. 7 years on this world had taught him more than just alien languages and customs. It had taught him how to think like his neighbors. Velter were ambush predators by nature, adapted for precision strikes and overwhelming force. They weren't used to prolonged firefights. He grabbed a handful of metallic powder from his workbench, aluminum dust from his welding supplies, and flung it into the air. The fine particles created a shimmering cloud that would confuse the Velter's compound eyes and interfere with their natural echolocation. Then he activated every piece of electronic equipment in his shop. Sparks flew as his power tools roared to life, their electromagnetic signatures creating a cacophony of interference. The Velter stumbled, disoriented by the sensory overload. Marcus didn't waste the opportunity. He grabbed Key and sprinted for the back exit, his mind already calculating angles and distances. The singing stones were only 50 meters away, and their crystalline structure would provide cover. But as they burst through his rear door into the storm, Marcus realized they weren't alone. More lights were cutting through the darkness. Not one or two, but dozens. An entire purist fleet descending through the storm like mechanical vultures. Key looked up at him with those enormous eyes, rain streaming down her pale carapace. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to bring them to you." Marcus pulled her close, shielding her from the worst of the weather. In the distance, he could hear the other Velter emerging from his shop, calling to their reinforcements. "Don't be sorry, kid," he said, checking his plasma cutter's charge level. Half empty, maybe 20 shots left, against dozens of trained soldiers. But he'd been in worse spots before. "We're going to get through this," he promised, not sure if he was lying or not. "I'm going to get you somewhere safe." The first of the reinforcement transports was landing now, disgorging more enforcement-caste soldiers into the storm. Their bioluminescent patterns cut through the darkness like angry stars. Marcus looked at the singing stones, then at the child in his arms, then at the army descending around them. He'd told Key she could stay forever. Now he had to make sure they both lived long enough for that promise to mean something. The crystalline formations rose from the mud like frozen lightning, their surfaces catching and reflecting the storm's electric fury. Marcus pressed his back against the nearest pillar, Key clutched tight against his chest, and tried to remember everything he'd learned about Velter tactics during his military briefings. They hunted in packs. They preferred overwhelming force to prolonged engagement, and they had one critical weakness that most humans never bothered to learn about. Their compound eyes, evolved for detecting movement in low light, could be overloaded by rapid changes in luminosity. The singing stone's natural piezoelectric properties generated electrical fields when subjected to pressure or vibration, like the kind of vibration produced by thunder. Marcus pulled out his multi-tool and began scraping at the base of the crystal, where the stone met the muddy ground. The material came away in phosphorescent flakes that glowed with stored energy. "What are you doing?" Key whispered, her translator picking up his movements. "Leveling the playing field," Marcus replied, gathering the crystal fragments into his jacket pockets. "These stones, they're not just pretty decorations, are they?" Key's compound eyes widened with understanding. "Mama said they sing to warn us of danger, but the purists don't listen anymore. They say the old ways are weakness." "Yeah, well, the old ways might just save our lives." The sound of approaching footsteps squelched through the mud. Marcus counted at least 6 distinct sets, moving in a standard search pattern, professional, disciplined, but predictable. He positioned himself at the base of the largest singing stone, a towering spire that hummed with barely contained energy. When the next lightning strike hit, the harmonic resonance would travel through the entire crystal formation. All he had to do was amplify it. "Cover your eyes," he told Key, then pulled out his plasma cutter and fired a sustained beam at the crystal's surface. The reaction was immediate and spectacular. The stone absorbed the plasma energy and channeled it through its molecular structure, creating a cascade of light that rippled through the entire formation. Every crystal in the area began to glow like a star, pulsing in rhythm with the storm above. The Velter search party stumbled, their compound eyes struggling to process the sudden sensory overload. Marcus heard confused chittering in their native language, followed by the distinctive whine of charging weapons. But they were firing blind now, their shots going wide as they tried to filter out the visual noise. Marcus moved like smoke between the stones, using his knowledge of their layout to stay ahead of the search pattern. Key clung to him without complaint, her small body surprisingly light despite her alien physiology. There, one of the Velter called out in accented standard, "The human flees like prey." Marcus smiled grimly, let them think that prey didn't set traps. He'd scattered crystal fragments in a loose circle around the formation, each piece carefully positioned to create a specific harmonic frequency when activated. The Velter were walking right into the middle of it. Lightning struck again, closer this time. The singing stones erupted in another cascade of light, but this time the scattered fragments joined the symphony. The combined resonance created a feedback loop that built in intensity with each electrical discharge. The Velter soldiers dropped their weapons, mandibles clicking frantically as they tried to filter out the overwhelming sensory input. Their natural echolocation was being scrambled by the harmonic interference. Marcus didn't waste the opportunity. He emerged from cover and fired 3 quick bursts from his plasma cutter, targeting their dropped weapons. The alien technology exploded in showers of sparks and bioluminescent fluid. "Impressive human," a new voice called from the edge of the crystal formation, "but ultimately futile." Marcus turned to see the purest leader emerging from behind one of the smaller stones. The alien moved with predatory grace despite the ongoing light show, and Marcus realized this one had been holding back, studying his tactics. "You fight with cunning," the Velter continued, his translator rendering the words with icy precision. "But you misunderstand the situation. This is not about one youngling, this is about the future of both our species." "Funny," Marcus replied, checking his cutter's charge. "I thought it was about a scared kid who needed help." The purist's mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter. "Youngling Kethara is not like other Velter. She is part of an experimental breeding program designed to create enhanced individuals, stronger, faster, more adaptable than baseline stock." Marcus felt key tense against his chest. Enhanced for what? "Integration with human technology. Your species excels at innovation and adaptation, while ours provides genetic stability and psychic sensitivity. Combined, we could create something unprecedented." The pieces clicked together in Marcus's mind. "You're talking about hybrid children, Velter-human crossbreeds." The purist faction believes such combinations are necessary for our survival in an increasingly complex galaxy, but the process requires extensive testing. Many subjects do not survive the initial phases. Marcus looked down at Key, understanding now why she'd been so terrified. They weren't just experimenting on children. They were using them as guinea pigs for some twisted evolutionary project. "And if I refuse to hand her over?" The purist leader raised a weapon Marcus hadn't seen before, a sleek organic device that pulsed with malevolent energy. "Then you will be eliminated as an obstacle to progress." But before either of them could move, new lights cut through the storm. Human lights, harsh and white and familiar, the cavalry had finally arrived. 3 human atmospheric craft descended through the lightning, their engines screaming as they fought the wind. Marcus recognized the design, Colonial Marines transports, probably from the settlement's emergency response team. The purist leader's compound eyes tracked the incoming ships with obvious calculation. "This changes nothing, human. The communion will have the youngling eventually. We are patient." "Maybe," Marcus said, raising his plasma cutter, "but not today." The first transport touched down in a spray of mud and lightning, its cargo bay opening to disgorge a squad of armed humans. Marcus recognized the lead figure, Captain Sarah Webb, his former commanding officer and current head of the settlement's security forces. "Marcus," she called over the storm's roar, "we got your beacon, what's the situation?" "Long story," Marcus shouted back, "but the short version is we've got company and they're not here to make friends." The purist leader hissed something in his native language, and suddenly the air filled with the sound of approaching engines. More Velter transports were descending through the storm, their organic hulls gleaming with hostile intent. The singing stones continued their light show, casting everything in an otherworldly glow as two species prepared for battle in the storm-lashed wilderness. And at the center of it all, a human engineer held an alien child and wondered how a simple act of compassion had escalated into what looked like the opening shots of an interstellar war. The battle erupted with the fury of the storm itself. Human plasma rifles spat coherent energy across the crystalline landscape, while Velter bioweapons responded with streams of living acid that hissed against the stones. The singing crystals caught and amplified every muzzle flash, turning the battlefield into a kaleidoscope of deadly light. Marcus crouched behind a medium-sized formation, key pressed against his chest, as Captain Webb's squad established a perimeter around their position. The Marines moved with practiced efficiency, using the crystal formations as cover while laying down suppressing fire. "How many?" Webb called over the chaos, sliding into cover beside Marcus. "At least 30, maybe more incoming," Marcus shouted back. "And Captain, these aren't regular enforcement caste, they're purists." Webb's face went pale. Everyone in the settlement knew about the purist faction, though direct encounters were rare. Religious extremists who believed their species was destined to rule the galaxy, with other races serving as either subjects or resources. "What do they want with the kid?" she asked, glancing at Key. "Long story, but they've been experimenting on children, trying to create some kind of hybrid warrior class." Marcus ducked as a bioweapon discharge melted the crystal inches from his head. "She's one of the test subjects." "Jesus Christ," Webb's expression hardened. "Rodriguez, flanking maneuver east side. Thompson, get on the comm and tell base we need heavy support." But even as the Marines spread out, Marcus could see more Velter transports landing beyond the crystal formation. The purists had committed serious resources to this operation. "Marcus," Key whispered, her voice barely audible over the gunfire. "I can help." "No way, kid. You stay right here where it's safe." "But I know things about the singing stones, about how they really work." Her compound eyes met his with startling intensity. "The purists don't understand. They think the crystals are just pretty rocks, but they're not." Marcus paused, remembering how the stones had responded to his plasma fire. "What are they?" "They're alive, not like us, but aware. They've been watching everything, learning about both our species." Key's small hands pressed against the crystal behind them. "Mama taught me how to listen to them before the purists took her away." A new sound cut through the battle, the deep thrumming of a much larger ship descending through the storm. Marcus looked up to see a massive Velter battlecruiser breaking through the cloud layer, its hull marked with purist insignia. "Aw hell," Webb muttered. "That's military-grade hardware. We are seriously outgunned." The battlecruiser's weapons systems came online with ominous efficiency. Particle beam arrays tracked across the battlefield, painting everything in targeting laser light. "All human forces," a voice boomed from the ship's communication array. "Surrender the experimental subject and withdraw from this area. You have 60 seconds to comply." Marcus looked at his former captain, then at the child in his arms. Key was touching the crystal with all four of her hands now, her eyes closed in concentration. A faint harmonic vibration was building in the stone. "What's she doing?" Webb asked. "I'm not sure," Marcus admitted, "but I think she's trying to." The crystal erupted in light. Not the scattered phosphorescence from before, but a focused beam of pure energy that lanced upward through the storm. The singing stone had become a weapon, channeling decades of stored electrical energy into a single devastating pulse. The beam struck the purest battlecruiser's shields and penetrated them like they were paper. Emergency lights flashed across the massive ship's hull as its systems overloaded. But Key wasn't done. Every crystal in the formation began to sing, literally sing, their harmonic frequencies creating a melody that seemed to bypass the ears and speak directly to the soul. The sound was hauntingly beautiful, full of longing and loss and desperate hope. And the purest forces stopped fighting. Not all of them, but enough to matter. Individual Velter dropped their weapons and stood transfixed, compound eyes fixed on the singing stones as if seeing them for the first time. Their mandibles clicked in what Marcus recognized as wonder. "It's the old song," one of them whispered in heavily accented standard. The Song of the Founders. The purist leader emerged from cover, his weapon raised but his posture uncertain. Ignore the acoustic manipulation, focus on the mission. But more of his soldiers were laying down their arms, drawn by whatever message the crystals were broadcasting. Marcus could see confusion and conflict in their body language, trained obedience warring with something deeper. Key opened her eyes and looked up at Marcus. They remember now. The stones are telling them what really happened here long ago. What do you mean? This place, this whole planet, it was a refuge once. A place where different species came to live together in peace. The crystals remember all of it. They're trying to show us what we could be again. The battle cruiser above was losing altitude, its damaged systems struggling to maintain power. But Marcus could see more ships on the horizon, reinforcements for both sides. This was escalating beyond anything the small human settlement could handle. Webb, he said, making a decision that would change everything. I need to get Key somewhere safe, somewhere they can't follow. Where the purists have ships, orbital capability. I know a place. Marcus stood, still holding Key close, but I need you to buy me some time. Captain Webb studied his face, recognizing the expression from their military days. You're going to do something stupid and heroic, aren't you? Probably, but it's the right thing to do. The crystal song was reaching a crescendo now, its harmonic frequencies carrying across the landscape. Even some of the human marines were stopping to listen, their faces filled with an emotion Marcus couldn't quite identify. Hope, maybe, or the memory of it. Go, Webb said, hefting her rifle. We'll hold them here as long as we can. Marcus nodded and began moving toward the edge of the crystal formation, staying low to avoid the sporadic weapons fire. But as he reached the perimeter, the purist leader's voice cut through the harmony. The human flees with our property. All units converge on their position. The spell was broken. Weapons began firing again as duty overcame wonder. But the damage was done. Enough purist soldiers had been affected by the crystal song to thin their ranks significantly. Marcus ran through the storm with an alien child in his arms, heading for the one place on this planet where even the purists wouldn't dare follow. The Deep City, the ancient Velter settlement that had been abandoned for centuries, where the original colonists had first learned to live in harmony with the singing stones. Where, according to legend, the crystals themselves had once chosen which visitors were worthy of sanctuary. Behind him, the battle raged on. Ahead lay darkness, mystery, and the faint hope that compassion could triumph over fanaticism. But first, they had to survive the journey through the heart of the storm. The ancient entrance to the Deep City was almost invisible, hidden behind a curtain of phosphorescent moss that glowed with the same bioluminescence as Velter technology. Marcus had found it by accident 3 years ago while tracking a wounded survey drone, but he'd never gone inside. The place felt sacred somehow, too important to disturb with casual exploration. Now carrying Key through the storm-lashed night, it might be their only sanctuary. Are you sure about this? Key asked as they approached the moss-covered opening. Her compound eyes were wide with something between fear and reverence. The Deep City has been sealed for 500 years. The Council of Matriarchs declared it forbidden. The Council didn't have purists trying to turn children into weapons, Marcus replied, pushing through the bioluminescent barrier. The moss parted like water, revealing a tunnel that descended into the planet's bedrock. Besides, sometimes the old rules don't apply to new problems. The passage was wider than he'd expected, carved from living rock and lined with more of the singing crystals. These formations were different from the ones on the surface. Older, more complex, their surfaces etched with patterns that seemed to shift in the strange light. As they descended, the storm sounds faded behind them, replaced by a deep harmonic humming that seemed to come from the stones themselves. The air grew warmer, carrying scents of ozone and something Marcus couldn't identify, something alien but not unpleasant. The crystals are more active here, Key whispered, reaching out to touch one of the formations. The stone pulsed at her contact, sending ripples of light down the tunnel. They're excited. Excited how? They haven't had visitors in a very long time, but they remember humans. They remember the first contact, when your people and mine learned to communicate through the crystal song. Marcus had heard stories about first contact, but the official histories were sanitized, focused on trade agreements and territorial boundaries. This felt different, more personal, like the stones themselves were telling a story. The tunnel opened into a vast chamber that took Marcus's breath away. The deep city wasn't a city in any human sense. It was a living sculpture carved from crystal and stone, its structures flowing seamlessly from the cavern walls like frozen music. Spires and platforms spiraled upward into darkness, connected by bridges that seemed too delicate to support their own weight. Everything glowed with soft phosphorescence, creating an environment that was both alien and somehow familiar. "My God," Marcus whispered. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Key's voice was full of pride and sadness. "This is what we were before the purists started teaching fear and hatred, before we forgot how to listen to the stones." Movement caught Marcus's eye, figures emerging from the shadows between the crystal structures. His hand went instinctively to his plasma cutter, but Key placed one of her small hands on his arm. "It's okay," she said. "They're friends." The figures approached slowly, and Marcus realized they were Velter, but unlike any he'd seen before. These were ancient, their carapaces worn smooth by centuries, their compound eyes dim with age. They moved with careful dignity, their forearms making complex gestures that seemed part greeting, part blessing. "Honored ancestors," Key said in her native language, then switched to standard for Marcus's benefit. "I seek sanctuary for myself and my human protector." The eldest of the Velter, a figure so old her carapace had turned nearly white, stepped forward and studied Marcus with eyes that seemed to look through him rather than at him. When she spoke, her voice was like wind through distant caverns. "A human in the deep city," she said in perfect, unaccented standard. "The crystals sing of this possibility, but we did not believe. Why do you come here, young one?" Marcus felt suddenly awkward, aware that he was probably committing some massive cultural violation just by being here. "The child asked for help. I couldn't say no." "The child," the elder repeated, then turned her attention to Key. "You are one of the altered ones. We sense the foreign patterns in your genetic structure, the purists' work." "Yes, honored ancestor." Key's voice was barely a whisper. "They killed my mother. They want to make me into something I'm not." The elder's mandibles clicked softly, a sound Marcus had learned meant deep thought. "And you, human, what do you seek here?" "Just to keep her safe," Marcus said, "until I can figure out how to." "No," the elder's compound eyes fixed on him with startling intensity. "That is not why you are here. The stones brought you to us for a different purpose. They have been waiting for someone like you, someone who could bridge the gap between species without seeking to change or control." Before Marcus could ask what she meant, alarms began echoing through the cavern. Not mechanical alarms, but harmonic warnings from the crystals themselves, their songs shifting to urgent minor keys. "They have found the entrance," another of the elders said, emerging from behind a spiral column. "The purists break the ancient seals." "How many?" Marcus asked, checking his plasma cutter's charge level. "Many, too many for us to resist with conventional means." The harmonic warning intensified, and now Marcus could hear the sound of weapons fire echoing down the tunnel. The purists were fighting their way through whatever defenses the deep city possessed. "There is another way," the eldest said, her voice carrying strange harmonics that made the crystals around them pulse with light. "But it would require trust between species, complete trust." "What kind of trust?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "The stones have been learning, watching, preparing for this moment. They understand both Velter and human nature now, but they need a conduit, someone who can help them communicate with both species simultaneously." Key looked up at Marcus with those enormous compound eyes. "They want us to be the bridge, both of us together." The sound of weapons fire was getting closer. Marcus could hear purist voices in the tunnel, barking orders in their native language. They'd be in the main chamber within minutes. "What would that mean?" he asked, "being a bridge?" The elder touched one of the larger crystal formations, and it erupted in complex patterns of light. Images began forming in the phosphorescence, not pictures exactly, but concepts made visible. Marcus saw the singing stones as they really were, not just minerals, but a vast distributed intelligence that had been observing life on Kepler 442b for millions of years. They had watched the rise and fall of countless species, learning from each one, storing their knowledge in crystalline memory networks that spanned the planet. When the Velter first arrived, the stones had welcomed them, taught them to work with the planet's natural harmonics. Later, when humans came, the crystals had tried to do the same, to create a harmony between species that could lead to something greater than either race alone. But fear and prejudice had intervened. The purists on one side, human supremacists on the other, each convinced that cooperation meant weakness. The stones want to show both species what we could become together, the elder explained as the images shifted and flowed. But they need willing participants, representatives who can speak for their people without hatred or fear. "And you think that's us?" Marcus asked, gesturing between himself and Key. "The child carries genetic modifications that make her sensitive to crystal harmonics," the elder said. "And you have something rarer, the ability to see beyond species, to judge individuals by their actions rather than their biology." The weapon's fire was in the main chamber now. Marcus could see muzzle flashes reflecting off the crystal walls as purist soldiers spread out among the ancient structures. "We're out of time," he said. "Whatever we're going to do, we need to do it now." The elder nodded and gestured to the largest crystal formation in the chamber, a massive spire that rose from floor to ceiling like a frozen waterfall. "Place your hands on the heartstone, both of you. Let the crystals show you what harmony truly means." Marcus looked at Key, then at the approaching soldiers, then back at the glowing spire. It was insane. He was about to let an alien intelligence into his mind based on the word of creatures he'd just met. But Key was already moving toward the heartstone, her small hands outstretched. "Together?" she asked, looking back at him with trust that made his chest tight. "Together," Marcus said, and placed his hands on the crystal beside hers. The world exploded into light and sound and sensation beyond anything human language could describe. Marcus felt his consciousness expand beyond the boundaries of his skull, merging with Key's thoughts and the vast intelligence of the crystal network. He was Velter, feeling the world through compound eyes and echolocation, tasting chemical signatures in the air. He was human, processing information through pattern recognition and creative leaps. He was crystal, patient and ancient and wise, watching the dance of life across eons. And through it all, he felt what the stones had been trying to show both species for centuries. That diversity was not weakness but strength, that the combination of different perspectives could solve problems that no single viewpoint could overcome. The heartstone pulsed with accumulated energy, and suddenly Marcus understood what the crystal network wanted to do. They were going to broadcast the harmony directly into every mind on the planet, Velter and human alike. Force both species to experience what cooperation actually felt like. "Can you do it?" he asked Key through their shared connection. "With your help," she replied, her mental voice steady despite her fear. "But it might hurt. The purists have closed their minds to anything that challenges their beliefs. Then we'll have to open them." The crystal network activated with the force of a controlled lightning strike. The pulse of energy that erupted from the heartstone was unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced. It wasn't just light or sound. It was pure information, compressed into crystalline harmonics that bypassed conscious thought and spoke directly to the deepest parts of the mind. Through his connection with Key and the crystal network, Marcus felt the wave expand outward like ripples in a cosmic pond. It raced through the underground crystal formations, burst up through the singing stones on the surface, and spread across the planet's electromagnetic field. Every thinking being on Kepler 442b felt it simultaneously. In the deep city, the effect was immediate and dramatic. Purist soldiers froze mid-stride, their weapons clattering to the crystal floor as their minds were flooded with sensations they'd never imagined. Through compound eyes that had only seen enemies, they suddenly experienced humans as the crystals did, flawed but resilient, innovative and adaptable, worthy of respect rather than fear. Marcus felt their confusion and terror as their fundamental worldview crumbled. These were beings who had built their entire identity around the superiority of their species, and now they were experiencing firsthand what human consciousness felt like from the inside. But the pulse worked both ways. Above ground, Captain Webb and her Marines staggered as alien thoughts flooded their awareness. They felt what it was like to navigate the world through echolocation, to communicate in harmonics that painted emotion as well as meaning, to think in the complex mathematical patterns that came naturally to Velter minds. My God, Webb whispered, her rifle forgotten as she stared at the purest soldiers around her with new understanding. They're not monsters, they're just afraid. The crystal song had become a symphony now, each formation adding its voice to a planetary chorus that spoke of unity, cooperation, and the infinite possibilities that came from combining different strengths. The harmony was so beautiful it made Marcus's human heart ache with longing. But not everyone was receptive to the message. The purest leader, the one who had confronted Marcus at his repair shop, stood in the center of the deep city with his weapon still raised, his compound eyes burning with fanatic determination. The harmony washed over him and broke like water against stone. Lies, he screamed, his translator device crackling with interference from the crystal song. Deception, our species cannot coexist, history proves this. He fired his bioweapon at the Heartstone, but the shot never reached its target. One of his own soldiers, a younger Velter who had been fully affected by the harmonic pulse, stepped into the path of the energy beam. The soldier's carapace dissolved under the acid attack, but his sacrifice protected the crystal. No more, the dying soldier whispered. No more hatred, the stones, they show us what we could be. Through the shared connection, Marcus felt the soldier's last thoughts, wonder and hope and profound regret for the years of conflict he'd helped perpetuate. The Velter died with his hand outstretched toward the Heartstone, adding his final harmonics to the planetary song. The purest leader stared at his fallen subordinate with something approaching horror. You were my student, my son in all but blood. How can you choose these aliens over your own kind? Because they're not aliens, another voice said from the shadows. An elderly Velter emerged from behind one of the crystal spires, not one of the deep city ancients, but someone Marcus recognized from the settlement's council meetings. They're neighbors, partners, friends, if we let them be. More Velter were entering the chamber now, but these weren't purist soldiers. They were civilians from the various settlements, drawn by the crystal song and the strange new understanding it had awakened. They moved carefully among the ancient structures, their compound eyes wide with awe. Counselor Thekmer, the purist leader snarled, I should have known you'd be involved in this corruption. The only corruption here is the poison you've been feeding our people, Thekmer replied calmly. The crystals don't lie. They've shown us what fear and hatred cost us, shown us what we lost when we stopped listening to their wisdom. Marcus felt the truth of those words through the shared connection. The crystal network held memories of Kepler 442b's golden age, when multiple species had worked together to build something greater than any could achieve alone. The Velter had been part of that harmony once, before fear and cultural isolation had turned them inward. But the harmonic pulse was starting to fade, its energy dissipating as it reached the limits of the crystal network's range. Marcus could feel Key's exhaustion through their link. Maintaining the connection was draining both of them. We can't keep this up much longer, she said, her mental voice barely a whisper. We don't need to, Marcus realized. Look around. The deep city was filling with representatives of both species. Humans and Velter stood side by side among the crystal formations, many of them touching the stones with wonder. The harmonic pulse had done its work, not by forcing cooperation, but by showing what it could feel like. The purist leader stood alone now, abandoned by soldiers who had experienced something beyond their conditioning. His weapon trembled in his grip as he looked around the chamber with growing desperation. This won't last, he said, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. When the effect wears off, they'll remember who they really are, what they really are. You're right, Marcus said, stepping away from the Heartstone but maintaining his grip on Key's hand. When the effect wears off, they'll remember that they're thinking beings capable of choice, capable of building something better than what fear gave them. The purist leader raised his weapon one final time, but before he could fire, Captain Webb appeared behind him. She moved with the fluid precision Marcus remembered from their military days, disarming the Velter with a combat technique that had been modified to work on alien anatomy. Sorry, she said as the bioweapon clattered across the crystal floor, but I've seen what happens when fanatics get hold of weapons. It never ends well for the innocent. The battle was over. Not through violence or overwhelming force, but through understanding. The crystal song continued its gentle harmony, no longer forcing awareness, but simply offering it to anyone willing to listen. Marcus looked down at Key, whose compound eyes were bright with exhaustion and hope. "So what happens now, kid?" "Now," said the eldest of the Deep City ancients, approaching with slow dignity, "we rebuild. Not just structures or governments, but the bonds between species that fear and hatred destroyed." "And the purists?" Webb asked, gesturing to the scattered soldiers who were still coming to terms with their expanded awareness. "Will be given the chance to choose," Thekmer said. "As will everyone else. The crystals don't compel cooperation, they simply show what it looks like. What each individual does with that knowledge is up to them." Some would choose the old ways, Marcus knew. Fear and hatred were powerful forces, and not everyone would be able to overcome them. But enough had been changed, enough had seen through the harmony what was possible, that there was hope. Real hope. And at the center of it all, a human engineer and an alien child stood hand in hand among singing stones that had waited centuries for someone willing to build bridges instead of walls. The storm outside was beginning to clear. 3 months later, Marcus stood in his rebuilt repair shop, watching through the window as children played in the yard outside. Human and Velter youngsters chased each other through the singing stones, their laughter creating harmonics that made the crystals pulse with gentle light. Key was among them, no longer the terrified refugee who had appeared on his doorstep during the storm. She moved with the confidence of a child who knew she was safe, protected, and loved. Her pale carapace was beginning to darken with healthy growth, and she'd gained enough weight that Marcus sometimes struggled to carry her when she fell asleep during their evening walks. The integration hadn't been easy. There had been setbacks, conflicts, and moments when it seemed like the old fears and prejudices would reassert themselves. But the memory of the harmonic pulse, the experience of truly understanding another species, had taken root in enough minds to make a difference. The purist movement hadn't disappeared overnight, but it had lost most of its support. Hard to maintain that other species were irredeemably alien when you'd experienced their thoughts and emotions as your own. Some of the former extremists had even become advocates for cooperation, their fervor redirected toward building rather than destroying. Marcus turned back to his workbench, where a new project was taking shape. It was a communication device designed to interface with both human technology and Velter biosystems. The prototype used principles he'd learned from studying the singing stones, harmonic frequencies that could carry both data and emotional context. "Working late again?" Captain Webb entered through the rear door, carrying 2 cups of coffee and moving carefully around the scattered tools and components. "The Council wants this finished before the next trade summit," Marcus replied, accepting the offered caffeine. "Apparently the other species in the sector have heard about our harmonic breakthrough and want to see if it'll work with their communication methods too." Webb settled into the chair he kept for visitors, a sturdy piece built to accommodate both human and Velter anatomy. "You realize what this means, don't you? If this works, if we can create universal translators based on crystal harmonics. We could be looking at the foundation of a true galactic community," Marcus finished. "Yeah, I know, no pressure or anything." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the children playing outside. The sound was different now than it had been before the storm, richer, more complex, full of linguistic experiments as 2 species learned to communicate through play. "Any word from the Deep City?" Webb asked. "The elders are pleased with the progress. Some of the younger Velter are even talking about reopening the other sealed cities, places that have been abandoned for centuries. They think the crystals might have preserved knowledge that could help with the integration." "And Key?" Marcus smiled, gesturing toward the window. "See for yourself." Key had separated from the other children and was approaching the repair shop with purposeful steps. She'd taken to visiting Marcus every evening after playtime, usually with some question about human technology or Velter history or the way the singing stones worked. She knocked on the door frame, a human custom she'd adopted, and waited for permission to enter. "Come in, kid," Marcus called. She entered with the careful politeness that seemed to be natural to young Velter, nodding respectfully to both humans before taking her favorite spot on the couch. In her 4 hands, she carried a small crystal formation, one of the resonant stones that had become popular among children of both species. "I've been talking to the stones," she announced without preamble. "They have something important to tell you." Marcus exchanged a glance with Webb. Key's sensitivity to crystal harmonics had grown stronger since the night in the Deep City, and she often served as an unofficial translator between the human settlement and the planetary network. "What do they want to tell me?" he asked, setting down his tools. Key placed the crystal on his workbench, and it immediately began to pulse with soft light. The harmony it generated was subtle but complex, carrying layers of meaning that Marcus had learned to interpret over the past few months. "They're grateful," she said, her compound eyes reflecting the crystal's glow, "for what you did that night, for choosing compassion over fear." "I just helped a scared kid," Marcus replied. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Key said with the certainty that only children could muster. "Not anyone. The stones have been watching humans and Velter for decades, looking for individuals who could bridge the gap between species. You were the first who chose to help without asking what it would cost you." The crystal's harmony shifted, becoming more urgent. Marcus felt rather than heard the message it carried, a warning and an invitation combined. "What is it?" Webb asked, noticing his expression. "The stones say there are other worlds," Marcus said slowly, interpreting the harmonic patterns. "Other species facing the same conflicts we had here. The galactic community isn't as unified as we thought. There are divisions, prejudices, wars that have been raging for centuries." "And they want us to help?" Webb asked. "Not just us. The whole integrated community we're building here. They think Kepler 442b could become a model for other worlds, a demonstration that different species can work together." Key nodded solemnly. "The stones have been in contact with crystal networks on other worlds. Some of them remember the old harmony too, from before fear and hatred divided everyone. They want to try the harmonic pulse on a larger scale." Marcus looked at the communication device taking shape on his workbench, then at the child who had changed his life by asking for sanctuary. When he'd whispered, "Stay forever," that stormy night, he'd thought he was offering refuge to one scared kid. Instead, he'd helped plant the seeds of something that could reshape the galaxy. "It won't be easy," Webb said, following his thoughts. "Expanding this kind of integration to other worlds, other species, the resistance will be enormous. There are entire civilizations built on the idea that their way is the only right way." "But it's possible," Marcus said, feeling the crystal's harmonics resonate with something deep in his chest. "The stones proved that much. Fear and hatred aren't inevitable, they're choices, and choices can be changed." Key stood and moved to the window, looking out at the children still playing among the singing stones. Human and Velter youngsters who saw each other as friends rather than aliens, who were growing up in a world where cooperation was normal instead of revolutionary. "I want to help," she said quietly. "With the other worlds, the other species. The stones chose me too, didn't they? Made me sensitive to their harmonics so I could be part of this." Marcus joined her at the window, watching as one of the human children taught a young Velter how to skip stones in the puddle left by recent rains. The Velter child's technique was different, using all four arms in a complex motion that sent the stone dancing across the water's surface with impossible grace. "The stones didn't choose you, kid," he said softly. "You chose them. That night when you knocked on my door, you could have hidden in the settlement or tried to find passage off-world. Instead, you asked a stranger for help and trusted that compassion was stronger than fear." "And you could have turned me away," Key replied. "Decided it was too dangerous, too complicated, but you said stay forever instead." Webb cleared her throat. "Not to interrupt this moment, but if we're really talking about expanding this integration model to other worlds, we're going to need resources. Ships, personnel, diplomatic support. The Council of Matriarchs has already voted to support the initiative," Key said. "And the Human Colonial Administration is interested too. They see the potential for peaceful expansion instead of the military conquest that's been standard for centuries." Marcus turned back to his workbench, looking at the communication device with new understanding. It wasn't just a translator, it was a key. A way to unlock the potential for harmony that existed on every world where thinking beings had learned to fear each other more than they trusted. "How long do we have?" he asked. The crystal pulsed with urgent harmonics, and Key translated with the gravity of someone much older than her years. "The stones say there's a world called Arcturus Prime where two species are on the brink of war. If we can't reach them in time, demonstrate that cooperation is possible." "Millions will die," Webb finished grimly. "Then we'd better get to work," Marcus said, reaching for his tools. "We've got a galaxy to save." Outside, the children continued their games among the singing stones, their laughter creating harmonies that spoke of hope and possibility. The storm that had brought Key to his doorstep was long over, but the changes it had set in motion were just beginning. In the distance, new ships were landing at the expanded spaceport, not military vessels this time, but exploration craft and diplomatic transports. Representatives from a dozen species who had heard about the Kepler experiment and wanted to see if harmony was truly possible. Marcus smiled as he returned to his work, remembering the words he'd whispered to a scared child on a storm-lashed night. Stay forever. It looked like that promise was going to be bigger than either of them had imagined. The singing stones hummed their approval, and somewhere in their crystalline network, plans were already forming for the next phase of galactic harmony. The universe was about to discover what happened when fear chose to become compassion instead.